Hello guys, this is Panzermeister36. Today's video is going to be a tutorial on painting very early war interiors, looking at this StuG 3 prototype here. It's very common for kits nowadays to provide you with a partial interior out of the box, and while it's not much, it does provide some great depth and realism for your vehicle. So today I'm going to be showing you how I painted and weathered this, as I said, very early war style of German tank interior. There's some color differences with mid and late war, so I'm going to be pointing those out, but overall this is very generic techniques which I think can help you paint and weather the interior of your German tank with some historical accuracy if you're concerned about that. This video is in collaboration with Scale Studio. He's another YouTube modeler just like me, and he's bringing you guys currently a bunch of videos on his own StuG 3. Right now he has one up on painting the interior of that vehicle, so once you're done here, you should go check out his video. Alright, so here is the kit assembled. This, by the way, is the Miniart StuG 3 O series. It's a prototype StuG 3. I'm disassembling it into the major sub-assemblies that I was able to assemble it in. You try to make as many sub-assemblies as you can because the more you have, the easier it is to paint. So I've got the whole superstructure. I've got the gun here in two parts. I've got the MP40 machine guns. I've got the seat, the radio, and so on. So this is as best as I can do, and we're going to work with that. First step is to kind of prime everything, or at least get a solid base coat. I'm going to use black paint here. Specifically, this is Tamiya NATO Black, and I'm just going to paint the whole interior with this black color. This will serve as a uniform coat. It'll also serve as a shadow coat, so if you miss anything later, you just see black, which doesn't look like anything. And also, further forward and back along the interior here, I can just paint them black so you don't see it at all. But it's important to hit everything with the black to start with. Alright, with the black paint everywhere on the interior, we can now move on to actually painting the interior. First up, I'm going to be painting the floor areas, and I'm mixing up a color out of a bunch of different Tamiya paints here. My mix was 2 parts XF18 and 1 part each XF78 and XF65. And the result is a kind of gross looking turquoise beige gray color. It reminds me a lot of like the interior color of a modern Soviet fighter aircraft, like that cockpit green, but it's more blue and not as intense. It's a kind of muted down bluey cockpit green color. It's hard to describe, but historically this color is called RAL 7009. It was used only very early in the war to paint the interiors of tanks. Later on they switched over to red oxide primer for all these lower components. But I guess earlier on in the war they're trying to be fancy, as the Germans do. So I'm painting everything that's halfway down the sponsons and below with this color. Now I mask off those areas to preserve that color, and we can move on to the next step. Now mixing up the ivory color that we usually see for the whole interior. This is a mixture of 3 parts white and then 1 part XF78 wooden deck tan. The result is a very light gray tan color, and really this should be more yellow than I have it here. But I went with a more white mixture because then when I weather it, it's going to kind of brown and turn more yellow. So I'm kind of planning ahead here. Historically, this color is called RAL 1001. It's the ivory color used to paint the interiors. It's white, it's reflective, it bounces the light around. And then the lower areas are either that blue color on these very early war vehicles and pre-war vehicles. And then, I guess pretty early on, they decided to just skip that and go right to red oxide primer for the lower areas. And by the way, the transition point between the darker color lower down, be it blue or red, and the white seems arbitrary. Different vehicles it's different, and it kind of moves around. Anyways, next up we're going to start by painting the interior details by brush. I'm going to take the AK Gen 3 chocolate chipping color, and I'm going to paint all the leather seating areas. So I've got a seat here for the loader, I've got the gunner's seat over here, and then I also have the commander's seat, which I really should have left separate because it's very difficult to paint it. Next up, rubber black. I'm going to be using this black color to paint kind of the mechanisms of the tank interior here. Mainly this is going to be the elevation and traverse mechanisms for the gun. So the two kind of like hand cranks here and kind of like the attachment systems for that. You can see it here, how much I've painted black. And also based off a reference photo, I painted the raising and lowering mechanism for the commander's seat with the black as well. Also painted the submachine guns with the same black color because, you know, it's the best I've got for these. And then once all these black areas had dried, I went back and dry brushed them with some of this basalt gray color. Now I know that dry brushing is kind of considered a lazy weathering technique nowadays, but it is quite effective in making harsh artificial highlights. And given that you can barely see these interiors even under good lighting conditions, I want to force as much contrast as I can to emphasize details and like wear and tear and stuff. Alright, next up I'm going to paint some metallic areas using the AK gunmetal paint, which is actually a metallic paint. I'm going to be applying this to mainly the breech. I have the actual breech block there, the kind of like the feed port of the gun. I don't know what this hole's called, but it's where the ammo goes. Also this here, which is the recoil meter, I guess. And then also the hydraulic parts here, you know, they're moving parts. And then the most important area is the entire side of this breech area here is just unpainted in reality because there's some kind of moving lubrication stuff there. I don't really get it, but this is how it should be, so paint them metallic. Additionally, the lever here, which I believe is the loader's opening and closing mechanism, is metallic, so I painted it separately, and then I glued it in place right over here. Now I'm going to take some of this red color and pick out a couple of highlights and areas that should be red, it seems. Now my reference here for these red details is David Parker's on Facebook, his 1/16th Panzer IV that he's basically scratch building the interior for. That thing is incredibly well detailed. It looks like a real Panzer IV, and he's got great references there, so go check out that Facebook page if you want to see more on tank interiors. Alright, now we got Russian green for the radios. Now I'm not too sure exactly how these German radios should be painted because it's really hard to find references, or maybe they were different colors because often references can kind of contradict each other here, I guess. So I just painted it green because that's what I see very commonly, and then I dry brushed it with some lighter green, and I'm painting some more details here, you know, the dials and stuff, with some red for the buttons and white and so on. This handle seems to be red for some reason. I don't know. This is just kind of me basing off a couple of photos, but I'm not sure this is entirely correct for the radio, but it looks pretty decent. Side note, adding your own wire to these radios really goes a long way. Good example of that is my flak grilly here, which I did a while ago. I added some wiring to these and they look excellent, and they definitely look better than what I did today, but it's alright. They're more visible. So now we've base painted the interior with all the base colors, I guess, but we can start some weathering now. I want to keep it basic, so I'm just going to do chipping and a wash. For chipping, I'm going to use whole red, and I'm just going to paint on some chips with a little paintbrush here. This is as small a paintbrush as I have. It's like a 10 or a 20/0, and I'm just taking a little bit of the paint and, you know, basically tapping and painting on individual chips and scrapes and stuff, and this can take a long time. So there's other ways to do this, as we will see in a second, but brush chipping does always look really, really good for stuff like this. And by the way, in reality, these interiors, they are really beat up. People always say that we chip our models too much. Well, the interior definitely actually should be really beat up. Alright, I got lazy real quick of the brush chipping, so I went with a sponge method instead. This is just sponge chipping. I have a little bit of the same red oxide paint on my little foam sponge here, and I can just gently tap and basically it'll catch edges and stuff and make its own chipping pattern, I guess you could say. This is a very fast method for making chips that look pretty decent, so it's effective on these lower areas that are hard to see. Second weathering step is going to be to apply a wash. Here I have a MIG ammo wash, which is the Africa Core wash. Basically, it's just a brown enamel wash. It's a good product, and I'm just applying it as an overall wash. So I'm not just applying it around details. I am instead applying it everywhere, and this almost acts as both a wash and a filter because it is accentuating details as a wash does, and it's also tinting the color like a filter does. And this gives me like you can see the accentuation of details here where the paint sticks around things and makes fake shadows, but the filtering aspect adds a grimy, dirty look very quickly and easily, and also makes the color more yellow, and now it looks like the actual ivory color that these things were in real life. And this is why I chose a lighter, whiter color to begin with, because I knew this was going to happen, and now it all looks right to my eye. So there we go, chipping in a wash, real quick, real easy, and it adds a nice lived-in look to the tank without taking up too much time. Here's the results of the interior from a point of view where you can actually see it. Honestly, these partial interiors, you can barely see them in the end, so don't spend too much time on this stuff. I spent maybe 3 hours on the interior total here, painting and weathering. Probably more time editing this video than I did actually doing the stuff in real life, so I'll show you in a minute how much you can actually see, but, you know, like I said, don't make this a masterpiece. Put some effort into it, you know, make it look cool. Like this, that looks really, really cool there. I wish I could see more of this, but you don't need to worry about it being too perfect. Like the chipping all doesn't have to be perfect, you know, because you can barely see it. It just has to serve a purpose, which is to make the tank look like it has, you know, some depth to it. And here we go. This is the finished tank here, and then you kind of look in the two hatches we have, and this is kind of what you see. You can't even see the floor, honestly. But like I said, this adds depth because now when you look at the tank, you know, you can see inside. You can see that there's, you know, more to it. There's interior parts, there's actual like crew use, there's dirt and chipping and so on. There's a radio. If you leave the tank hatches all closed, you know, you kind of lose this aspect. And even though you can not really see much, this still adds to the story of the vehicle and it looks really interesting. So there we go, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you picked up some good tips on painting these very early war, or in the case of this vehicle, pre-war tank interiors. As I was explaining before, if you're doing something that's like mid-war, late war, it's going to be basically the same process, but then the blue areas are going to be red oxide primer. Check out Scale Studio's video for that kind of process. I will bring a video on that soon. It's kind of the same thing, but I really need to also do more research onto the point between the white and the red transition. It seems like sometimes it's the floor, sometimes it's halfway up the sides. I don't really know. These interiors are so complicated. And now here I go rambling on as usual. Anyways, thanks to my Patreon supporters. Those guys really helped me out making these videos. I will see you guys soon with another video on painting this tank. Until then, happy modeling and goodbye.